Mountains in the palm of my hand. Threw it all away.
Bob Dylan's I Threw It All Away as reworked by Yola Tengo. Songs aside, we're none too good at recycling and rather better at throwing it all away. Well over 500 kilograms per person per year on average, adding up to nearly 30 million tonnes between us. And that's just household waste. While at least some of us have improved in terms of how much and what we recycle, others still don't seem disposed to discard discriminatingly, with old batteries, used cleaning products, unfinished medicines and all sorts of other potentially dangerous materials being routinely chucked in our bins. Until recently, no one's had a clear idea just how much of this hazardous household waste there is and what the main sources are. But the results are now out of the first detailed UK study, and they make for interesting and sometimes alarming reading. With me is one of the main people behind it, Nick Voulvoulis from the Centre for Environmental Policy at Imperial College London. Nick Voulvoulis, going through people's bins is the sort of thing that's normally left to kind of down-market paparazzi and celebrity stalkers. Is it really necessary for researchers to take this approach to find out how much hazardous materials are out there?
Well, I guess it is. We didn't actually go through their bins. We provided special bins for this.
Good.
So we've collected separately household hazardous waste items that we had identified as important.
OK, we'll get on a little onto the methodology later, but does this relate to this WEEE, W-E-E-E, directive that I think fully came into force a couple of months ago?
Well, waste, electric and electronic equipment is part of what we call household hazardous waste, but it was actually excluded from our study because of the sheer volume and weight involved with the collection of these items. So we focused on everything else, really, except WEEE.
OK, so Nick, when you were trying to investigate people's disposal methods, you had to make sure with all these extra bins you gave them, it wasn't getting too complicated for them.
Yes, it was a matter of explaining to them what exactly we needed to collect, how often we were going to go there, and make sure, obviously, that we meet health and safety kind of regulations with regards to how people dispose of these items. So it was quite a complicated exercise. It ran for a whole year. But again, because it was done for research purposes, it was simpler to manage it rather than...
And one more question before we actually get on to the results. What about the risk of a different kind of contamination? The very act of people knowing that what they throw away is being looked at, isn't there a risk it will change their behaviour? They might dispose more or less of particular things than they used to do.
We actually encourage them to change their behaviour because we wanted them to put everything in the bin, while normally they might have disposed things in a different way. They might have taken them to civic amenity sites or flushed them down the drain. So the idea is that we just wanted to estimate the amounts. So we did want them to change their behaviour and put everything in the bin we provided, so we have accurate estimates in terms of the generation rather than disposal of these types of waste.
So how many households were involved?
Just more than 500 households, and across different areas in England, but we actually went for a different type of representative sampling, which is based on socio-economic classification of their consumer behaviour.
All right, so within that 500 you've got every type of consumer reason.
People living in council flats to people having gardens in big houses, that sort of thing.
And they stayed with you for the year, did they?
Yes, except I think it was up to 10 households that I think people moved out, or one or two that changed their mind. Most of them actually stayed, which was surprising.
So if you've got 500 households, you've got a year's supply of rubbish. There's an awful lot of things in there. Yes. Can you mentally pick through all this rubbish and say what some of the key findings were?
Well, in terms of volume, I guess paint was in the top of the list. In terms of weight, batteries were again on the top of the list. Interesting, household pesticides were surprisingly interesting, because we don't expect people to use some pesticides unless they have gardens, and obviously that was the case. But they're particularly hazardous if you think in terms of the chemicals they contain. I think that's probably in terms of the categories, the most important ones. You have to remember that the reason we're interested in this type of waste is because of the chemicals, the hazardous compounds they contain. So it's interesting to see disposal to landfill as a pathway for aquatic pollution. So that's the reason we have been focusing on this type of waste.
Nick, is it partly about perception? I mean, most of these things, we're not throwing them away thinking this is a piece of hazardous waste and I can't be bothered to dispose of it in a more intelligent way, we don't think of batteries or paints or pesticides. So kind of raising awareness solve some of these problems?
It's an interesting question. We focused on a different work working on pharmaceuticals, trying to find the link between public perception of the risks and how people dispose of them. And we didn't find a significant link. What we found a significant link with was environmental awareness. So if you were a person that was recycling anyway, you were more likely to return, let's say, pharmaceuticals to the pharmacist rather than putting them down the bin.
So, Nick, let's imagine somebody's listening to this programme now. They're a huge DIY enthusiast. Their car is filled with old tins of paint and window frames. They're heading to the dump. Is there anything you can tell them they should be doing that's a better way to get rid of this stuff?
Well, you see, one of the problems is that waste management in a lot of cases is down to local authorities. So unless I know in which local authority they belong, it's very difficult to identify which schemes are currently active in their area for collection of such waste.
So there may be something in their area,
Yes,
there may not.
Yes, and it's actually a myth, I think, that it's difficult for people to change their behavior. What our research demonstrated is that if there are mechanisms to facilitate such change, then it works.
Nick Voulvoulis, thanks. That was A Complete Time of Waste.